Episode 27. Theological Themes and Motifs of the Joseph Narrative, Genesis 37:50. The Joseph Narrative and Conclusion, Genesis 37:50, form the climactic section of the book of Genesis, presenting a cohesive, novella-like story of Joseph, Jacob's favored son, whose journey from betrayal to leadership in Egypt ensures his family's survival and positions Israel for its next phase in Egypt, setting the stage for the Exodus, Exodus 1:15. Unlike the episodic patriarchal narratives, Genesis 37:50 offers a unified arc that resolves Genesis covenantal themes, land, descendants, and blessing, Genesis 12:1-3, while introducing theological motifs of divine providence, forgiveness, leadership, and communal identity. These themes, woven through Joseph's trials, rise to power, and reconciliation with his brothers, underscore God's faithfulness, human responsibility, and the formation of Israel's tribal structure. Rooted in the late Bronze Age and shaped by the Babylonian exile, the narrative addresses both ancient and modern audiences, offering theological insights that resonate across Jewish tradition, Christian and Islamic theology, and global ethical frameworks. This exploration examines 5 key theological themes: divine providence, forgiveness and reconciliation, covenantal continuity, leadership and responsibility, and communal identity, analyzing their narrative expressions, theological implications, Torah connections, interpretive traditions, interfaith significance, and contemporary relevance, demonstrating how they unify Genesis and prepare for the Torah's redemptive arc. 1. Divine Providence. Divine providence, the belief that God orchestrates human events to fulfill divine purposes, is the central theological motif of the Joseph narrative, encapsulating its message of hope and sovereignty. This theme is most explicitly articulated in Joseph's declaration to his brothers, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive." Genesis 50:20. Providence unifies the narrative's events, transforming human failings into divine opportunities, and prepares for the Torah's redemptive narrative. Narrative expression. Joseph's journey is a tapestry of trials: betrayal by his brothers, Genesis 37:18-28, enslavement to Midianites and Potiphar, Genesis 37:28, 39:1, imprisonment, Genesis 39:20, and eventual rise to Egypt's vizier, Genesis 41:40-46, all orchestrated by God to save Israel and Egypt from famine, Genesis 41:57. His dreams, Genesis 37:5-11, initially a source of conflict, are fulfilled as his brothers bow to him, Genesis 42:6, signaling divine foresight. God's presence is often implicit, working through natural events, for example, Pharaoh's dreams, Genesis 41:17, and human decisions, for example, the butler's remembrance, Genesis 40:14-23, contrasting with the explicit divine interventions in Genesis 12:36, for example, Abraham's visions, Genesis 15:1. This subtlety highlights providence's pervasive yet hidden nature, as seen in Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, Genesis 41:16. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Key episodes, such as Joseph's resistance to Potiphar's wife, Genesis 39:9, how can I sin against God, and his care for Egypt's poor, Genesis 47:13-26, reflect divine guidance, ensuring the covenant's survival amidst adversity. Theological significance. Divine providence affirms God's sovereignty over human history, countering the chaos of sibling rivalry, Genesis 37:18-28, and famine, Genesis 41:27-31. It aligns with Genesis' broader theme of God's faithfulness, seen in the covenant with Abraham, Genesis 12:1-3, and prepares for the Torah's emphasis on divine deliverance, Exodus 3:7-10. The motif underscores grace, as God uses flawed characters, Joseph's arrogance, Genesis 37:5-11, the brothers' jealousy, Genesis 37:18, to achieve redemptive ends, echoing the patriarch's frailties, for example, Jacob's deception, Genesis 27, and foreshadowing Israel's rebellion and restoration, Numbers 14, Deuteronomy 30. Providence extends to non-Israelites, as Joseph saves Egypt and surrounding nations, Genesis 41:57, fulfilling the universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, and prefiguring the Torah's inclusive ethic, Leviticus 19:34. Torah connections. The narrative's providence prepares for the Exodus, where God delivers Israel from slavery, Exodus 14, fulfilling Joseph's assurance of divine visitation, Genesis 50:24-25. The motif resonates in the Torah's wilderness narratives, where God provides manna, Exodus 16, and guidance, Numbers 9:15-23. Deuteronomy's covenantal theology, emphasizing God's faithfulness, Deuteronomy 7:9, builds on Genesis 50:20, framing Israel's history as divinely orchestrated, from Egypt to Canaan. The theme of hidden divine action foreshadows the Torah's legal framework, where obedience to God's laws ensures prosperity, Leviticus 26:3-13, reflecting Providence's long-term plan. Jewish interpretive traditions. Midrash, Bereshit Rabbah 89:2, views Joseph's rise as God's plan to preserve Israel, with his dreams, Genesis 37:5-11, as prophetic, linking to Torah redemption, Bereshit Rabbah 84:10. The Talmud, Sota 11 am, sees providence in Joseph's trials, comparing them to Israel's Egyptian sojourn. The Zohar interprets Joseph as Yesod, foundation, channeling divine blessing, Zohar, Vayishev 182a, with his leadership restoring cosmic order, prefiguring Sinai's covenant, Exodus 19. Rashi emphasizes God's hidden hand in Genesis 41:16, tying providence to Torah faith. These interpretations shape Jewish liturgy, with Vayikra readings highlighting Genesis 50:20 as a model of trust, influencing Musar teachings on divine guidance. Interfaith perspectives. Christianity, providence aligns with Christian theology of God's plan, with Joseph's trials prefiguring Christ's suffering and exaltation, Acts 7:9-16. Romans 8:28, all things work together for good, echoes Genesis 50:20, shaping sermons and devotionals. The universal blessing, Genesis 41:57, informs mission theology, as seen in Augustine's City of God. Islam, Surah Yusuf, Quran 12:21-101, emphasizes Allah's plan in Joseph's rise, Genesis 41, with his forgiveness, Genesis 45:4-15, reflecting divine mercy, Surah Yusuf 12:92. Islamic exegesis, like Al-Tabari's, sees Joseph's dreams as divine signs, linking to Quranic providence, Surah Al-An'am 6:84. Contemporary applications. Providence inspires spiritual resilience, addressing modern disconnection. Pew Research, 2023. Jewish Renewal uses Genesis 50 hours 20 minutes in retreats, while Christian apps like YouVersion feature devotionals on Joseph's trust, reaching millions. 2024 data. The motif informs ethical frameworks, with NGOs like World Vision citing Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes to promote global aid, aligning with UN SDGs, 2015. It resonates in secular contexts, inspiring narratives of hope amidst crises, from pandemics to conflicts. Cultural impact. Providence shapes Jewish identity, tefillah, Christian theology, sermons, and Islamic spirituality, aid reflections, unifying Abrahamic faiths. Globally, it influences literature, for example, Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, film, for example, Joseph, King of Dreams, and ethics, emphasizing divine purpose in human struggles. 2. Forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness and reconciliation are pivotal motifs in the Joseph narrative, resolving Genesis' pattern of sibling rivalries, for example, Cain-Abel, Genesis 4, Jacob-Esau, Genesis 27, and modeling covenantal ethics. Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers, Genesis 45:4-15, and the family's reunion, Genesis 46:29-30, highlight teshuvah, repentance, and communal healing, preparing for the Torah's ethical vision. Narrative expression. The brothers' betrayal, selling Joseph into slavery, Genesis 37:18-28, stems from jealousy over his dreams and favored status, Genesis 37:3-11. Their remorse emerges during their Egyptian encounters, Genesis 42:21-22, we are guilty concerning our brother, culminating in Judah's selfless plea to save Benjamin, Genesis 44:18-34. Joseph's emotional revelation, I am Joseph, do not be distressed, Genesis 45:35, and his assurance, God sent me before you to preserve life, Genesis 45:7, transform betrayal into reconciliation, uniting the family, Genesis 45:14-15. Jacob's reunion with Joseph, Genesis 46:29-30, completes the arc, affirming familial bonds. The brothers' fear of retribution after Jacob's death, Genesis 50:15-18, and Joseph's reaffirmation of care, Genesis 50:19-21, underscore forgiveness' enduring nature, ensuring unity. Theological significance. Forgiveness reflects divine grace, mirroring God's mercy toward the patriarch's flaws, for example, Abraham's deception, Genesis 12:13. It fulfills the covenant's relational aspect, fostering harmony to sustain the great nation, Genesis 12:2. Teshuvah is central, as the brothers' repentance, Genesis 42:21-22, and Judah's transformation, Genesis 44:18-34, model moral growth, aligning with the Torah's call for repentance, Leviticus 26:40-42. Reconciliation extends the universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, as Joseph's forgiveness benefits Egypt and Israel, Genesis 47:13-26, prefiguring the Torah's inclusive ethic, Deuteronomy 10:19. Torah connections. The motif prepares for the Torah's ethical laws, such as "You shall not take vengeance," Leviticus 19:18, rooted in Joseph's example, Genesis 45:4-15. The Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16, echoes Teshuvah, formalizing communal reconciliation. The narrative's family unity foreshadows Israel's covenantal community at Sinai, Exodus 19:5-6, where collective responsibility is emphasized, Exodus 24:3-8. Deuteronomy's restoration promises, Deuteronomy 31:5, build on Genesis 45:7, framing repentance as key to covenantal renewal, linking Joseph's forgiveness to Israel's future. Jewish interpretive traditions. Midrash, Bereshit Rabbah 93:8, praises Judah's plea, Genesis 44:18-34, as Teshuvah, meriting his leadership, Genesis 49:8-12, while Joseph's forgiveness, Genesis 45:4-15, models divine mercy, Bereshit Rabbah 92:5. The Talmud, Yoma 86b, cites Genesis 45 as a paradigm for repentance, influencing Yom Kippur liturgy. The Zohar sees Joseph's reconciliation as restoring Shekinah's unity, Zohar, Veichi 235b, prefiguring Sinai's covenant. Ramban views Genesis 50:19-21 as covenantal chaste, shaping Musar ethics. These interpretations inform Jewish practices, with Genesis 45 read during Selishot, emphasizing forgiveness in communal worship. Interfaith perspectives. Christianity, Joseph's forgiveness prefigures Christ's teachings, Matthew 6:14-15, with Genesis 45:4-15 shaping reconciliation theology, as seen in Augustine's sermons. The motif influences Christian ethics, with organizations like Prison Fellowship citing Joseph for restorative justice. Islam, Surah Yusuf 12 hours 92 minutes depicts Joseph's forgiveness as divine mercy, shaping Islamic ethics of pardon, Surah Ash-Shan 94:6. Tafsir like Ibn Kathir's emphasize Teshuvah, linking Genesis 45 to Quranic values, as seen in 8 sermons. Contemporary applications. Forgiveness addresses modern conflicts, with Genesis 45:4-15 inspiring peace-building, seeds of peace, and restorative justice, UN 2024 initiatives. Jewish programs like the Musar Institute use Joseph's example to teach reconciliation, countering polarization, Gallup, 2023. Christian ministries, for example, focus on the family, and Islamic platforms, Yaqeen Institute, apply Genesis 45 to family therapy and community healing, addressing post-COVID relational strains, Barna, 2024. Secularly, the motif informs conflict resolution frameworks, with mediators citing Joseph's approach in diplomatic training, for example, Oslo Accords legacy, promoting unity amidst diversity. Cultural impact. Forgiveness shapes Jewish liturgy, Yom Kippur, Christian ethics, Lord's Prayer, and Islamic spirituality, Ramadan reflections, unifying Abrahamic faiths. Globally, it influences literature, for example, Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner film, for example, The Prince of Egypt, and social movements, emphasizing healing and unity. 3. Covenantal continuity. Covenantal continuity ensures the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham, land, descendants, and blessing, Genesis 12:1-3, through Joseph's leadership and Israel's survival in Egypt, bridging Genesis to the Torah's nationhood. Narrative expression. The covenant's promises are reaffirmed as Israel grows in Egypt, Genesis 47 hours 27 minutes, Israel, multiplied exceedingly, fulfilling the great nation pledge, Genesis 12:2. Joseph's role in saving his family, Genesis 45:7, and Egypt, Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes, extends the universal blessing, as nations seek grain, Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes. Jacob's blessings, Genesis 49, allocate covenantal roles to the tribes, with Judah's leadership, Genesis 49:8-12, foreshadowing kingship, 2 Samuel 7, and Joseph's prominence, Genesis 49:22-26, reflecting his role as preserver. Joseph's burial request, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here, Genesis 50:24-25, reaffirms the land promise, fulfilled in Joshua 2400 hours 32, linking Genesis to the Torah's conquest. Theological significance. Covenantal continuity underscores God's faithfulness, ensuring the promise's survival despite threats, famine, Genesis 41:27-31, family division, Genesis 37:18-28, and exile, Genesis 46:1-7. It aligns with Genesis' theme of divine commitment, Genesis 15:6. The motif emphasizes Israel's unique role, with the tribe's formation, Genesis 49, distinguishing the covenantal line, prefiguring the Torah's holy nation, Exodus 19:6. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, is fulfilled as Joseph's leadership benefits Gentiles, Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes, reflecting God's global purpose, echoed in prophetic visions, Isaiah 49:6. Torah connections. The narrative's growth in Egypt, Genesis 47 hours 27 minutes, sets up Exodus 1:7, where Israel becomes a nation, fulfilling the descendants' promise. The land promise, Genesis 50:24-25, links to the Exodus, Exodus 3:8, and conquest, Joshua 1. The tribal structure, Genesis 49, prepares for Numbers organization, Numbers 1:4, with Judah's role, Genesis 49:8-12, echoing the Torah's leadership laws, Deuteronomy 17:14-20. The universal blessing informs the Torah's inclusive laws, such as care for strangers, Leviticus 19:34, building on Genesis 41:57's global impact. Jewish interpretive traditions. Midrash, Bereshit Rabbah 98:3, sees Jacob's blessings, Genesis 49, as prophetic, allocating covenantal destinies, with Judah's kingship linked to David, Bereshit Rabbah 97:8. The Talmud, Sanhedrin 92a, views Genesis 50:24-25 as covenantal hope, influencing Haftarah readings. The Zohar interprets Joseph's leadership as channeling Yesod, ensuring covenantal flow, Zohar, Veichi 235b, prefiguring Sinai's covenant. Rashi ties Genesis 47 hours 27 minutes to Exodus 1:7, emphasizing continuity. These interpretations shape Jewish liturgy, Veichi, with Genesis 50:24-25 recited in Pesach to affirm redemption, influencing Zionist hopes. Interfaith perspectives. Christianity. The covenant's continuity prefigures Christ as Abraham's seed, Galatians 3:16, with Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes fulfilling the universal blessing, as seen in Origen's exegesis. Joseph's burial, Genesis 50:24-25, resonates with Christian hope, influencing Easter liturgies. Islam, Surah Yusuf 12:99-101 views Joseph's role as preserving Ibrahim's covenant, with the universal blessing, Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes, aligning with Islamic global mission, Surah Ibrahim 14:35-41. Tafsir like Al-Razes emphasize continuity, shaping Tafsir studies. Contemporary applications. Covenantal continuity inspires Jewish identity, with Genesis 50:24-25 fueling Zionist movements and Aliyah, Israel Migration Agency, 2024. Christian mission organizations, for example, Wycliffe, cite Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes for global outreach, addressing spiritual disconnection, Pew, 2023. Islamic platforms, Alim, use Surah Yusuf to affirm prophetic continuity, fostering interfaith dialogue, Abrahamic Family House, 2023. Secularly, the motif informs heritage preservation, with UNESCO citing biblical narratives for cultural identity, 2024. Cultural impact. The motif shapes Jewish liturgy, Seder, Christian theology, mission, and Islamic exegesis, Tafsir, unifying Abrahamic faiths. Globally, it influences literature, for example, Anita Diamond's The Red Tent, art, Chagall's Joseph, and cultural preservation, emphasizing legacy and hope. For leadership and responsibility. Leadership and responsibility emerge as key motifs, with Joseph's transformation from dreamer to vizier modeling covenantal stewardship and ethical governance, preparing for the Torah's leadership ideals. Narrative expression. Joseph's early arrogance, Genesis 37:5-11, gives way to humility and wisdom, as seen in his resistance to temptation, Genesis 39:7-12, interpretation of dreams, Genesis 41:16-36, and administrative reforms, Genesis 47:13-26. His appointment as vizier, Genesis 41:40-46, reflects divine endorsement, fulfilling his dreams, Genesis 42:6. His care for Egypt's poor, Genesis 47:13-26, and family, Genesis 45:7-11, balances justice and compassion, contrasting with the brothers' initial cruelty. Genesis 37:18-28. Judah's leadership emerges in his plea. Genesis 44:18-34, earning Jacob's blessing. Genesis 49:8-12. Joseph's humility. Am I in the place of God? Genesis 50:19, underscores servant leadership, ensuring covenantal survival. Theological significance. Leadership reflects covenantal responsibility, with Joseph embodying chaste, loving kindness, and wisdom, aligning with Genesis' call to bless nations. Genesis 12:3. His integrity. Genesis 39:9, models fidelity to God, prefiguring Torah virtues. Deuteronomy 6:5. The motif highlights divine empowerment, as God equips Joseph. Genesis 41:16, echoing the patriarch's guidance. Genesis 15:1, and foreshadowing Moses' calling. Exodus 3:11-12. Judah's growth. Genesis 44:18-34, complements Joseph, showing leadership's communal aspect, preparing for Israel's tribal structure. Numbers 2. Torah connections. Joseph's leadership prefigures Moses. Exodus 18, who balances justice and compassion, and the Torah's kingship laws. Deuteronomy 17:14-20, emphasizing humility. The motif informs priestly roles. Leviticus 8, reflecting covenantal stewardship. The ethical governance in Genesis 47:13-26 echoes the Torah's social laws. Leviticus 25, ensuring equity, while Judah's role, Genesis 49:8-12, foreshadows Davidic leadership. 2 Samuel 7. The narrative's servant leadership aligns with the Torah's communal ethic, where leaders serve the holy nation. Exodus 19:6. Jewish interpretive traditions. Midrash. Bereshit Rabbah 90:3, praises Joseph's wisdom. Genesis 41:33-36, as divinely granted, linking to Torah leadership. Bereshit Rabbah 89:4. The Talmud, Sota 36b, lauds his integrity. Genesis 39:9, shaping halakhic ethics. The Zohar views Joseph as Yesod, leading with divine flow. Zohar, Ve'ishev 182a, prefiguring Sinai's priesthood. Ramban sees Genesis 50:19 as covenantal humility, influencing Musar leadership teachings. These interpretations inform Jewish education, with Genesis 41 shaping leadership programs like the Wexner Foundation. Interfaith perspectives. Christianity. Joseph's leadership prefigures Christ's servanthood. Philippians 2:7, with Genesis 41:40-46 shaping pastoral ethics, as seen in Aquina's writings. Christian leadership training, for example, Willow Creek, cites Joseph for integrity. Islam. Surah Yusuf 12:54-55 depicts Joseph's leadership as divinely guided, shaping Islamic governance ethics. Surah An-Nisa 4:58. Tafsir like Al-Qurtubi's emphasize his humility, influencing fiqh leadership principles. Contemporary applications. Joseph's leadership informs modern governance, with Genesis 41:33-36 cited in Business Ethics, Forbes, 2024, and Public Policy, UN 2024 frameworks. Jewish and Christian programs, for example, Center for Faith and Work, apply Genesis 39:9 to workplace integrity. Islamic platforms, Yaqeen Institute, use Surah Yusuf for leadership training, addressing diversity, Gallup, 2023. Secularly, the motif shapes servant leadership models, with TED Talks citing Joseph for ethical decision-making. Cultural impact. Leadership shapes Jewish ethics, Tzedakah, Christian ministry, pastoral care, and Islamic governance, Shura, unifying Abrahamic faiths. Globally, it influences literature, for example, John Maxwell's leadership books, film, for example, The Prince of Egypt, and policy, emphasizing responsibility and service. 5. Communal identity. Communal identity, the formation of Israel's tribal structure, is a culminating motif, with Jacob's blessings, Genesis 49, and family unity, Genesis 45:16-28, establishing Israel as a covenantal community, preparing for the Torah's nationhood. Narrative expression. Jacob's blessings, Genesis 49, assign roles to the 12 tribes, with Judah's leadership, Genesis 49:8-12, Joseph's prominence, Genesis 49:22-26, and others' destinies, for example, Levi's priesthood, Genesis 49:5-7, shaping Israel's identity. This resolves Genesis family divisions, Genesis 37:18-28. Joseph's reconciliation, Genesis 45:4-15, and provision, Genesis 47:1-12, foster unity, with Israel's settlement in Goshen, Genesis 47:27, marking communal growth, fulfilling the descendants' promise, Genesis 12:2. The narrative's closure, Jacob's burial, Genesis 50:5-13, and Joseph's death, Genesis 50:22-26, reinforces tribal cohesion, with the land promise, Genesis 50:24-25, uniting the community toward Canaan. Theological significance. Communal identity fulfills the covenant's great nation promise, Genesis 12:2, transitioning from a family to a tribal collective, prefiguring the Torah's holy nation, Exodus 19:6. It underscores God's relational covenant, requiring unity, Genesis 45:14-15. The motif highlights divine election, with the tribes' roles, Genesis 49, distinguishing Israel, aligning with Genesis' chosen line, Genesis 12:1-3, and Torah's mission, Deuteronomy 7:6-8. Unity extends the universal blessing, as Israel's cohesion, Genesis 47:27, benefits Egypt, Genesis 41:57, reflecting God's global purpose, Isaiah 42:6. Torah connections. The tribal structure, Genesis 49, prepares for Numbers organization, Numbers 1:4, with Judah's leadership, Genesis 49:8-12, echoing the Torah's camp arrangement, Numbers 2. The motif informs Sinai's covenant, Exodus 19:24, where Israel unites as God's people. The land promise, Genesis 50:24-25, links to the Exodus, Exodus 3:8, and conquest, Joshua 1, while communal ethics, Genesis 45:4-15, foreshadow the Torah's social laws, Leviticus 19:18. Deuteronomy's tribal blessings, Deuteronomy 33, build on Genesis 49, affirming communal identity as central to covenantal life. Jewish interpretive traditions. Midrash, Bereshit Rabbah 98:2, views Genesis 49 as prophetic, with Judah's kingship, Genesis 49:8-12, linked to Messiah, Bereshit Rabbah 97:8. The Talmud, Shabbat 55b, sees tribal unity as covenantal, influencing Haftarah readings. The Zohar interprets the tribes as Sphirot, unifying divine attributes, Zohar, Veichi 235b, prefiguring Sinai's community. Rashi ties Genesis 47 hours 27 minutes to Exodus 1:7, emphasizing growth. These interpretations shape Jewish liturgy, Veichi, with Genesis 49 read in Shabbat services, fostering communal identity and Zionist unity. Interfaith perspectives. Christianity, the tribal structure prefigures the Church as God's people, 1 Peter 2:9, with Genesis 49:8-12 linked to Christ's kingship, as seen in Jerome's exegesis. The motif influences ecclesiology, emphasizing unity. Islam, Surah Yusuf 12:99-100 depicts family unity as divine favor, shaping Islamic communal ethics, Surah Al-Hujurat 49 hours 10 minutes. Tafsir like Al-Tabari's emphasize tribal cohesion, influencing Ummah concepts. Contemporary applications. Communal identity inspires Jewish unity, with Genesis 49 informing synagogue networks and Israeli policy, Israel Unity Government, 2024. Christian churches, for example, Saddleback, use Genesis 45 for community building, addressing polarization, Gallup, 2023. Islamic initiatives, for example, Muslim World League, cite Surah Yusuf for Ummah unity, fostering interfaith dialogue, UN 2024. Secularly, the motif informs community development, with NGOs like Habitat for Humanity citing Genesis 47 hours 27 minutes for cohesion. Cultural impact. The motif shapes Jewish identity, Kiddush, Christian community, fellowship, and Islamic unity, Ummah, unifying Abrahamic faiths. Globally, it influences literature, for example, Toni Morrison's Beloved, Art, Tisset's Joseph's Brothers, and social movements, emphasizing collective purpose. 6. Synthesis, theological themes as Genesis resolution and Torah's bridge. The theological themes of Genesis 37:50, divine providence, forgiveness, covenantal continuity, leadership, and communal identity, unify the Joseph narrative, resolve Genesis covenantal promises, and bridge to the Torah's redemptive arc. Providence, Genesis 50 hours 20 minutes, transforms trials into salvation, affirming God's sovereignty and preparing for the Exodus, Exodus 3:7-10. Forgiveness, Genesis 45:4-15, heals familial rifts, modeling Teshuvah and Torah ethics, Leviticus 19:18. Covenantal continuity, Genesis 47 hours 27 minutes, 50:24-25, fulfills the promises, Genesis 12:1-3, setting up Israel's nationhood, Exodus 1:7. Leadership, Genesis 41:40-46, reflects covenantal responsibility, prefiguring Torah governance, Deuteronomy 17:14-20. Communal identity, Genesis 49, establishes Israel's tribes, preparing for Sinai's community, Exodus 19:6. Jewish interpretations, Midrash, Zohar, deepen these themes, linking Genesis to Torah spirituality, while Christian and Islamic perspectives unify Abrahamic theology. Contemporary applications address modern challenges, disconnection, conflict, governance, and unity, ensuring the narrative's relevance. As Genesis' conclusion, these motifs bridge ancient promises to Torah redemption, inviting all to engage its vision of faith, healing, and communal hope. Theological unity. The themes interweave to affirm God's faithfulness, human responsibility, and covenantal purpose, unifying Genesis' arc from creation, Genesis 1, to tribal formation, Genesis 49. They prepare for the Torah's redemptive climaxes, Exodus liberation, Sinai covenant, and Canaan conquest, framing Israel's mission, Deuteronomy 7:6-8. Narrative resolution. The motifs resolve Genesis conflicts, rivalries, Genesis 4:27, and promises, Genesis 12:1-3, with Joseph's story concluding the patriarchal era and transitioning to nationhood, Exodus 1. The narrative's closure, Genesis 50:24-26, reaffirms hope, linking to the Torah's narrative arc. Interpretive and interfaith depth. Jewish exegesis enriches the themes, shaping liturgy and ethics, while Christian and Islamic interpretations foster dialogue, emphasizing shared values of providence and forgiveness. The motif's universal appeal bridges religious and secular contexts, informing global ethics and culture. Contemporary resonance. The themes address modern issues, spiritual seeking, social division, leadership ethics, and community building, ensuring Genesis 37:50's vitality in a pluralistic world. They inspire interfaith initiatives, policy frameworks, and cultural expressions, fulfilling the Torah's call to be a light to the nations, Isaiah 42:6. 7. Conclusion, a theological capstone for Genesis and beyond. The theological themes and motifs of the Joseph narrative, divine providence, forgiveness and reconciliation, covenantal continuity, leadership and responsibility, and communal identity, serve as Genesis' theological capstone, resolving its covenantal promises and bridging to the Torah's redemptive vision. Divine providence, Genesis 50:20, underscores God's sovereignty, guiding Joseph's trials to salvation and preparing for the Exodus. Forgiveness, Genesis 45:4-15, heals divisions, modeling Teshuvah and Torah ethics. Covenantal continuity, Genesis 47:27, 50:24-25, fulfills God's promises, setting up Israel's nationhood. Leadership, Genesis 41:40-46, reflects covenantal stewardship, prefiguring Torah governance. Communal identity, Genesis 49, establishes Israel's tribes, preparing for Sinai's covenant. Enriched by Jewish interpretations, embraced by Christian and Islamic theology, and applied to modern challenges, These themes unify Genesis 37:50 as a narrative of hope, healing, and purpose. From ancient Egypt to contemporary contexts, the Joseph narrative invites all to engage its theological vision, shaping faith, ethics, and community in an ever-changing world. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members. Leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.